So we're going to open the floor for questions for any of the four speakers.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you, Helen, how does this actually, what you're talking about and what you're doing, how does this scale up to feed the world? I mean, because it's one thing, you know, obviously, as you better than anyone, know to work on whatever it is, 10 acres or 200 acres, but these corporate farms are just enormous amounts of land, and so I'm just, how do we scale it and stay true to the values that we're talking about?
I have to take a deep breath. I'm getting teary-eyed here, which doesn't happen to me often anymore. We're around people. It does around the land a lot. So I'm going to answer that question. But I'm thinking about all kinds of other things now because of listening to these two. And so I almost think that the question needs to be expanded. And yet I can answer that question really well. So I'm going to answer that question with depth and say that in the answer, the really most important thing is what we all said, if you heard us, which was listen to your heart, put your hands to the earth, and think indigenously. Okay, now I'm going to answer that question. So we have a lot of evidence of what is sustainable. We also have a system that is developed because we all left the land and we congregated in clustered concentrations, and so we moved away from putting our hands in the soil, all of us, and we built these systems based on a lot of resources. So I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. I think a lot of this can be done. I didn't have children because I'm worried about too many humans on the planet, and I think that a lot of permaculturists disagree with me, but I think the way I have learned from listening to the land to be a part of the land and work sustainably with it, it is hard to have huge human populations. That being said, you start somewhere. You start with the way I'm being indigenous and putting my hands to the earth. You start with the way they're doing it in Kentucky. You start with the way they're doing it in Atlanta. So you can go to my website. I'm publishing at other places. I'd be glad to give you that. I have lots of data. The answer to the question, though, I'm going to give these guys the mic and see what they have to say, is that we can do it. I over-fertilized when I used manure. I never did side dressing of fertilizers. We have now at Woodleaf for 20 years been fertilizing with recycled nutrients coming from our wood-based fertilizers and recycling the plants that grow and growing our own fertilizer. It can be done. It can be done. Any ideas?
Just one thing. I just want to say to Nicole, we can see you, so if you feel like chiming in at any point, just, put your hand up or say something or whatever, like we hear and see you, so you can totally, like you can chime in. You're not sort of excluded from the conversation. So yesterday we had also said, even if a question is directed to one speaker, the other speakers are more than welcome to also address that question, chime in, give their opinion. So feel free, to all four of you to say whatever. So yeah, does anybody else want to say anything to that? Okay.
Hi. My understanding is that we actually do produce enough in this world to feed everyone. So really the issue is more inequitable access to food. So I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yes, I feel I agree with what you said, sis, that there's already plenty of food being produced, and the idea of scaling what we're doing up to those sizes really is counterproductive, because the whole point of us doing the work that we're doing in the way that we're doing it is to be responsible for our small space. The idea that 1, 2, 5, 10 people should be feeding 18,000 people is kind of how we got into the issue, right? And the only reason industrial agriculture is, not the only, one of the main reasons industrial agriculture is being done the way it's being done as far as with these large machines and all that is because the captive free labor became illegal. And it became illegal right around the time that machines were being produced, right? So the equitable distribution of food is really an interesting question, because in Atlanta we're doing work, and we're doing work with a lot of different organizations. And there's the Atlanta Community Food Bank, which is a large food bank institution that brings in food and redistributes it to people who cannot afford it. And y'all have food banks here in San Francisco? Mm-hmm. So is that food organic, or is it grown in good ways? No. So we have a situation where there's already so much food that's being produced, and the majority of the food is being produced in toxic ways. The majority of the food that rich and poor people eat is being produced in toxic ways. But what happens is once that toxic food starts to get old, then it gets redistributed to the people who can't afford to buy it. So imagine eating old toxic food as opposed to pretty new toxic food, right? So when we talk about the distribution of food, we have to look at how we're choosing to live. Because it's our choice. If we're coming from it as a consumer, Georgia Organics is a consumer-based organization that puts together these videos. And I've sat with the executive director on many occasions to talk and say, you know, it's interesting because you're a local food advocacy group, but you're a consumer-led organization. And so Nassim had talked about this, and this has been a conversation throughout the forum, is that if the leaders of the food movement are consumers, it's very different than the Zapatista struggle. It's very different than the struggle of agroecologists all over the world. Because the agroecologists are speaking, the voices at the table are the producers, they're the growers. So normally the questions that come are coming from the consumers, and they're saying, look, I just want to make sure that I can get this food. When that became a concern for me, I started to grow. Because I wanted to be able to get good food too. And I wasn't getting it in Pomona, I wasn't getting it in Long Beach, I wasn't getting it in South Central. In South Central at the time when we started food forestry, we were not even able to buy organic produce. It didn't matter how much money you had in your pocket. For me to get organic produce, I had to leave South Central Los Angeles. So then we looked and said, but damn, we have 365 days of sun. Why don't we stop acting like babies? You know? Because typically the viewpoint of African Americans in this country by the outside group is that we're just a bunch of whining babies. And I agree to some degree. Because all we had to do was plant the food. We were in South Central LA. We got Afghanistan mulberries, we got Chinese bananas, and we started planting the food. What happens at that moment is the same thing what happens when a young adult starts to think they're a grown person in their grown parents' house. The parents say, oh, you're grown? Get out of the house. And every time that oppressed people stand up and start to act as adults, self-sufficient adults, that's when the backlash happens. You following me? Because us as presenting these questions about how do we get good food distributed to us, people love that conversation. They'll let that conversation run for 30 years. They want to see a brown sister standing up saying, how do we get food distributed to us? We don't. You don't ask nobody to feed you. That's the issue. But once you feed yourself, know what happens with that. Then they say, go back to Africa. Go back to Mexico. If you want to sit around and create your own societies that are autonomous, where you feed yourself and educate yourself. Anybody ever heard of the MOVE organization?
Yeah.
The MOVE organization, it's the only time a bomb has been dropped in the United States. And it was dropped on a sovereign community of black people who were feeding themselves, educating themselves, and housing themselves. So that's the rub, is that as long as I'm asking you to feed me, then you can be kind of aggravated and upset by me. But it's different if I say, you know what, I don't need your school. I don't need your hospital for when my wife wants to have a baby. We'll have the baby in the living room. The food will be in the backyard, and we'll homeschool. They are locking up homeschool moms of every race. They are demanding that California, right? Didn't they just pass a mandatory vaccination?
Yeah.
So this is not a race thing. The only reason I bring race into it is because whatever's happening to us is happening to us first, to see if you all are going to protest. And if you don't, then it will happen to you.
I just have to add, sorry. So Howard Zinn said something that always inspires me. If you want to change the system, stop participating and it'll go away. And I want to say that, God, I so agree with that. I'm so glad you're saying that, because you can say it so much better than I can. What we're doing at Woodleaf is that we come in and do these marathon weekend markets in Berkeley and San Francisco and Marin and Sebastopol, and we try to be somewhat sustainable by driving a truck and a trailer, and, you know, we're being good, you know, environmentalists. But where we were screwing up is that in Berkeley, we would have poor people come and not be able to buy our high-end organic stuff. You know, and so we're giving stuff away at the end, that this good agroecology organic, but there was a missing link. And part of it is, God, the park across the street from our farmer's market should have been growing things. But the other thing that we found that we could do that came right back to reconnecting my hands to the soil and with my singing spiders is that to keep my singing spiders alive, I was allowing for that 10%, what we would call cosmetically challenged peaches that you eat in the dark and by candlelight. And we have a section in Berkeley, and now we have it in Marin. That eat by candlelight sign, oh man, people go and look at that. And it's the stuff that my little codling moth started to take a little bite out of, and then my bird got him. But it's not perfect. It's not perfect. But, you know, I keep telling them, look at my wrinkles. I'm not perfect either, and I'm bringing you both food. And so people would buy that at a huge discount. And you know what? I still don't have the answers. I want to learn from all of these guys. Thank you, Nicole. You too. That we still have to figure it out. But that was one thing that made me feel less evil, to be able to have that food.
Yeah, I think really what Eugene also is talking about is why we're calling this a vegan food sovereignty forum and we're not calling it a vegan food justice forum, because the concept of food sovereignty goes much farther than how food justice is often defined. And the conversation around food justice often is about questions of access, and it's often about the eaters, the consumers, and sometimes people will talk a bit about the laborers, the farm workers. Very rarely is it about also the farmers. And it's not about saying we care more about one group or the other. It's about all of these groups are, you know, we're all part of the same group and we're all living in the same food system, unless we're really the capitalists owning certain companies. And so food sovereignty is really what this is more about, and that's the foundation, I think, of autonomy, which is what Carolina was talking about yesterday with the Zapatistas. And frankly, that's how I got interested in the food movement as well. It wasn't because I had any particular interest in food, and I don't think that issues of access to food are more important than many, many other human rights issues that we could be working on. But it's just that this whole system is such a foundation to everything else. And what Eugene is saying is really, he's talking about autonomy, and he's talking about removing ourselves from a certain system and building a different system. Okay, sorry.
It's exciting.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So, Helen, I'm wondering, in an effort to raise awareness about these alternative farming practices that are more sustainable and compassionate, is your next farm now going to be labeled veganic, and your website will have that information? Because when people see veganic, they'll ask what that veganic is, and how is it different from organic, and why is it better?
Boy, that is a really good question. Thank you. I'm going to work in that direction because I have more freedom now to do that. I also live with a non-vegan. So I live with that person that I have to not argue with. I also love him, and he's teaching me a lot. So yeah, thank you for inspiring me to do so, and I will try to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I also have a question, actually. It kind of relates to what Michael was asking, how do you scale it up and whatever, and I agree that I don't think that scaling up is really what we necessarily need to do, but the question of how do you scale up ultimately has to do with how is the system efficient? Does it work well? And I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about what it might mean to farm veganically, because we have this idea of manure being some magical sort of substance, and somehow maybe veganic works sometimes but not really everywhere. So maybe could any of you guys maybe speak to that? Like, obviously it works to farm veganically, but how well does it work? Not in terms of scaling it up, but just in terms of just how effective in terms of the efficiency of what you're doing, the sustainability, etc. And I know that you've already spoken to that, but how can we change this idea that a sustainable, well-functioning system is necessarily inclusive of a cow that provides manure? Or also, does this sort of system work everywhere? So California is very, sunny and all that, but how can this work in somewhere like Canada? I know that 1 Degree Organics is based there, but can all the farmers do that,
I'm going to talk a lot about this next. That's kind of the topic of so I'm not going to say anything, but go ahead, guys. And Nicole.
Yeah. I can't really see if anyone else is about to talk. So.
Sorry, Nicole. Okay, so Helen said that she was going to speak about that later, so she's not going to speak about it now. And yeah, if you like, go ahead.
I just wanted to say one thing about the kind of productivity paradigm, which is often almost like the kind of capitalist way of thinking of productivity, and I think it was Eugene was talking more about abundance, and I find with permaculture it's a lot nicer to think of kind of land or an ecosystem as being abundant, and I prefer that term than kind of, I guess, productive. But I just wanted to say, in terms of animals, when I host courses on vegan permaculture or food growing or whatever, I ask people what's your favorite animal in a system? And they're all like, what? I thought this was a vegan course. And I'm like, no, think about it. And then we do a go around, and it's worms and birds and frogs and newts. And so for me it's okay, we don't want to create systems without animals. We want systems with more animals, as many living, self-determining animals as possible. They're just not in a kind of exploitative, coercive relationship. Yeah, that's all I was gonna say about. I know it doesn't answer the question, but just as a kind of response I often give about productivity in animals and outputs and stuff.
Thank you. Yes.
And it's about the earth and the place and the space. So it's knowing your terrain, it's knowing all these beautiful living beings and what they do, and when it does rain and when it doesn't rain, and when the sun is really bright, and brilliant and when it isn't, and who likes shade and who doesn't. So it really just gets back to that, just this beautiful earth, and what and when and how will it and does it, and what loves to grow there beautifully and naturally, and it's just really just getting back to beauty and just like recognizing beauty and with all the living beings and everything too.
People in the back too.
Oh, okay. I didn't really see who started. I think,
Maybe so you could come
yeah,
forward when you have to talk.
go ahead with your question and I'll repeat it.
First of all, I want to thank you all. You're so amazing and inspiring. Just completely blown away. And I have been wanting to do, just urban. I live in Oakland. I'm really interested in doing building up the land and also being a part of a larger community. I don't really. Planted a persimmon tree. I got just little things starting, but I have millions of questions, and I really prefer. It feels very lonely after a while, just kind of doing this on your own. And I'd love to be part of a larger community, or learn from some people who are in the area. And do you know anyone who give any ideas? I'm afraid that I'm going to miss the entire thing because I have to leave at 2. The rest of it.
Sorry, Nicole, I'll just summarize quickly, but it was a question from somebody who lives in Oakland and is very, first of all, grateful for all of your presentations, but also wondering how to find not only more information, but a community of sort of interested folks locally or, yeah.
Create one and they will come. But there are people in Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, the gentleman that was here yesterday.
There's
Antonio.
people in Oakland, yeah.
Were you here yesterday?
Yes.
Okay, did you see the last gentleman, the last speaker, Antonio? Maybe not.
Thanks.
But I think the whole reason with the forum is that on the list on the page, there's people who already have things moving and going on, and there's people in this room that you should definitely connect to at the break time. I'd say anybody who's doing things here, make sure you see this young woman because she's hungry for it, And there was a gentleman named Antonio who presented yesterday a real broad overview of what's happening in this area, and I know Chema's connected as well, so seek them out.
But she's asking also people doing veganic specifically.
Oh,
which
I
doesn't
can't
exist in
answer
the
that.
area.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to be facetious though when I said create it and will you come. When I left the university and split up with my vegan partner, who made me stop being such a scientist, I created my website, and I cannot tell you how many people have contacted me. I can't keep up with them from my website, and I was just doing it because I was alone in Montana with all my cowboys and cowgirls.
I just kind of feel like I want to learn from some people who are already doing it. I don't know, we live in a drought. I mean, right now it's not a drought, but and there's just a lot of other.
So I don't have an answer to that question, and not only do I not have an answer, but it's because I didn't have an answer that I created this and invited people who are not from the Bay Area, other than Helen, who at least sells her stuff in the Bay Area. But that's really why, for this panel, you have somebody Skyping in from the UK, somebody from Atlanta, somebody from, because we have to create it.
Yeah.
But just one thing that I found a little bit interesting, I went a couple months ago on a hike or 3 months ago or something, I went on a hike in Oakland organized by an organization called Wild Oakland. And the hike was, they had invited somebody who has a small nonprofit called Climate Healers. He's based in Arizona. And so he was kind of leading that hike, and the topic of his presentation was overgrazing and its effects in the Bay Area. And so he was showing us in the hills what overgrazing has done to this region. And Wild Oakland organizes talks on the ecology of the East Bay every month, but they're not vegan or anything like that, but of course they're sensitive to the issue of overgrazing. I was really interested by who showed up at that hike. Some were the FFAC people, and there was also a woman there I don't know the name of her organization, but I could show you a couple articles she's written. She lives near Point Reyes, and there's apparently a big sort of battle going on between the ranchers who do, you know, like the grass-fed, really best of the best kind of beef that people think is very, very sustainable and really the type of food system we have. And so there's those guys who are ranching on public lands, and then you have a group of conservationists who have been opposing that because of how detrimental it's been to native ecosystems. And on top of, you know, just the effect that the grazing is having directly on the plant life, and that's what they're opposing. Also, a lot of elk, which are native species, have died because the ranchers have been fencing off areas for the cows to drink the water, and so the native elk have not been accessing the water and have been dying. And so, you know, so what I'm saying is that, yes, that woman wasn't doing veganic gardening, but she would be a like-minded person for you to connect with. Because at that hike in Oakland, I was surprised that just the knowledge of the people who are there, their understanding of, you know, native ecosystems and the effect that cattle was having here, and it's a very different understanding and discourse than you're going to find at the ferry building where it's like, let's bring a bunch of cows. And no, these people get that sort of alternative, but the more mainstream alternative is also not ideal. So essentially, I think that what Helen is saying is that even though nobody else is doing it, there are people who are doing things that are connected and related, where you could nonetheless create connections that are, you know, fruitful.
And Veganic Agriculture Network, that website I had on my last slide, Veganic Agriculture Network is, you know, people put in their questions, and then everybody from all over answers it. So you can do that, and then you'll start to build them here in this area, too.
Cool. Well, I was just gonna say in response. Well, so my friend right here is talking to her. Her and I just finished a permaculture course in Oakland, and we were the only vegans there, and we are, which is of course why we're here. We're trying to incorporate and learn more about veganic permaculture, and we've even though like everyone has mentioned, non-vegans are very intellectual and smart and have a lot of knowledge to share that we otherwise wouldn't have learned if we only stuck with, you know, the interest of like-minded. Very resourceful people, but yes, we are trying to create this opportunity out here. So, and we are baby steps. You know, we're barely learning. I'm interested in contacting all of you and seeing where we can go from there. But definitely, if you need any help, definitely, or if anyone in the local area is interested in veganic permaculture here, let's start something.
Yeah,
So.
awesome.
The gentleman in the back.
Actually, could the people who are in the back and who have questions, maybe could you step up? I think that's going to be smoother. That way you can use the mic without me running over there. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. So 2 interrelated questions. One of them is just a quick clarification. So I don't know, my understanding before today was that I had heard a lot of this sort of dichotomy between the only choices being manure and synthetic fertilizer. And I think what you were saying, Joe, was really interesting in terms of like, yes, we can get manure from animals without having to kill them, which seems pretty straightforward. But then you, Helen, were saying that actually, you know, who even needs the manure? It's healthier to just do with plant matter. And so I guess the question is for both of you, or either of you, if you have something to add on sort of what, you know, is some level of manure helpful or not, I guess, or does it depend where you are? And then also in terms of wildlife, because that brings a question of, okay, if you want manure but you don't want to be raising animals for slaughter, either sanctuary for farmed animals or wildlife will be coming in. And then my question too is, how does this relate for not only preserving but potentially expanding habitat for wildlife. I know in the UK, I just read George Monbiot's book about her wilding. Thought it was interesting. So yeah.
Okay, so anybody can answer, and Nicole, if you at any point want to, now or later, just, tell us. Okay, Joe is gonna.
I think that looking at the systems that Helen has talked about, like in that regards and at that level, and maybe at that the amount, it's not necessarily a sanctuary. So like you're not going to have those sorts of animal inputs, but since we have adopted pigs and chickens, or we will have chickens and we have ducks right now, I find it like kind of a funny conversation because I knew that it was going to be like, well, you're vegan, like what's up with that? But I'm also not going to shovel it and throw it in a garbage can to go somewhere else. So I think it's a matter of like, well, what is manure? So like, there's going to be worms in the soil anyway, and they're going to be creating their manure, right? So like, if we're composting our manure as human manure and putting it back out into the orchards and the forests and stuff like that, I personally don't have a problem with the adopted animals coming in because it's, again, it's that like voluntary relationship where like, they're going to poop and they're going to poop wherever they're at, and it's going to be incorporated into the soil. I don't know if that really answers it. It might not be I have no problem not calling it veganic farm then.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily my goal to create that at the moment. Now, if we decide to go towards a veganic system of selling fruit and vegetables, then we'd probably create orchards that wouldn't have that sort of input. But I think it's one of those really gray areas where like what is, if there's birds flying overhead kind of thing, And,
I didn't mean to challenge ethically. I
No,
was
I don't-
wondering, like scientifically, which is better for the soil, I guess.
yeah, maybe you could speak to that.
Well, I can answer it scientifically, but first, Nicole, I want to tell you that my favorite animal in our veganic orchard is the wild turkeys. And then I'll tell you a funny story about my non-vegan. He loves the wild turkeys, and nobody is allowed to hurt the wild turkeys. This is a man I have to talk out of eating chicken, and he loves the wild turkeys. So isn't that a wonderful way of thinking about it? So the wild turkeys are really important in our system. I told you about the birds. I told you about our insects. The turkeys, as the brown rotted, diseased fruit, we do have some, falls to the ground. We put it to the ground and we try to stamp it in so that our soil food web, who's so active, can work on it. But some get missed because we're not perfect human beings at our farm yet. They come and they eat it. You find all these little pits because the turkeys have eaten. We have about 60 per our 8 acres. Yeah. Okay, and so then the answer, I think, so I've worked with some of my favorite organic farmers who have chicken tractors. And they've been hauling them through, and two things happen. We have concentrated manures, and we have disruption of what I'm going to show you as habitat. And so we have been able to stop spraying any organic sprays in our orchard. My other organic friends with their chicken tractors have not, because the chickens have been tearing up the habitat and there is no longer a place for the beneficial insects. So that's one way of thinking it. The other way is lots of nitrogen and phosphorus from manures in concentrated areas that can build up in the soil, and I think that then we have some problems that we're just beginning to understand in this new age of seeing what long-term organic farming means, people that have been doing it for 20 to 30 years. And then my last funny story, my non-vegan partner just had a fit yesterday. We're trying all very hard to be non-confrontational because the farm we're moving to in Eastern Oregon is right in the middle of where I left, cattle country. And there are still horses being boarded on this property, and that lady called last night and said, I had to move them because we had rain into that south pasture. You don't mind, do you? Carl hit the roof because that's where our first experiment plots are going to go. And he said, I don't want animals leaving their manure and compacting the soil with their hooves. This is my non-vegan, veganic farmer. So, and he has more intuition because he has lived on this land for 35 years and touched the land. So, I have some science, I have some touch the land stuff, and I think that you can also come to a piece of soil where manure can be helpful because we've torn it up. It's a Georgia clay. My first farm was some of my farming was in Northeast Georgia, Helen, Georgia, Clayton, Georgia. It was, you could take the soil and throw it against the wall and it would stick there. So in that particular case, when you're trying to get organic matter to the soil fast, I think back to your answer, if the soil organic matter levels are too low, below about, depending on the climate and the soil, I'm going to just throw a number out there, below 3%, then if you don't have time to get green manures going in the soil, and there were some sanctuary animals around, that wouldn't bother me. Did that answer?
Yes. I just have a real small question. What was the acreage of your current farm versus the new one? So
the one here in California?
Yeah.
Woodley Farm, the orchard that Carl's been doing for Woodley Farm, that's the old farm, 30 plus years, is 26 acres, 8 of it in production, in 1 to 2 acre fields sporadically placed within the oak forest. Or, I mean, it's not really like that, but it is like that. That's exactly what it is. So there's about 1 to 2 acre fields, and then all separated by oak pine forest.
So you're moving from 26 acres to 210.
And then 210, and 70 of that is irrigated acreage. So there's going to be a lot of bean planting there.
Wow.
And we're going to do it strip cropped.
Can't wait to come visit.
I'm kind of excited.
Next People's Harvest Farm is going to be on Hollis.
All right. That works.
Did you want to, I think you had your hand up earlier, right?
What does the future look like for each of you in terms of like community-wide, city-wide, national scale? More people becoming involved in these kind of things, like how does that change the communities we have?
I'm gonna let Nicole start because since she's on Skype, it's better. If you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
What's next? So actually this forum's really reinvigorated my passion for agroecology. My other main thing I do is fighting prison expansion in the UK, and it's kind of like a few of you have been talking about resistance work and how much energy it takes and stuff. It's kind of been slowly destroying my soul a little bit, and they want to build like 9 new mega prisons in the UK. So I've kind of been thinking, oh God, I'm going to have to leave the land where I live and just focus on this full time if I'm going to be effective. But listening to everyone, it's like I couldn't leave my garden, and I can't, abandon the food sovereignty movement. Like, it's so important. So in terms of the UK, we have a really great group called the Vegan Organic Network, who've been producing publications and working really hard for a long time. But it's quite a small group, and there's like a network around it. But I feel like next steps are really kind of movement building in the sense of like, getting people together more, like organising events like this one in the UK. Reclaim the Fields is like a European-wide constellation of kind of anti-capitalist growers, and we have an assembly in January in Poland. So I like to work on that scale as well. But generally it's, kind of fighting our conservative government's assault on our communities in terms of austerity and prison expansion and policing expansion, and still trying to inspire people to grow their own food and not be so alienated and atomized. I guess just howling for your pack, and trying to work with like-minded people and getting people together and organising. It's always the next step, unfortunately.
Thank you.
This is a great question, brother. For Grow Where You Are specifically, if you go to growwhereyouare.farm, on our main webpage, on the first page is a video of myself describing a project. And the reason that video came to be, it's called the Farmhouse Project, and it's about housing around or attached to urban agricultural movements in low-income African-American communities. And what happened was the Center for Civic Innovation out of Atlanta partnered with, I think it was the Red Cross or something like that, and they were putting out some money for whoever had a great pitch in 3 minutes about a social justice cause. And so my wife and I videotaped this pitch, and it's about, there's a whole lot of foreclosed properties all through Southwest Atlanta and all throughout the nation. And the idea was that we would partner with people like Habitat for Humanity and Urban Construction and different folks, get money, buy properties, refurbish them into like green buildings, put the growers that are matriculating through urban ag programs throughout Atlanta and throughout the nation into these homes with the same commitment that a lot of teachers, police officers, and firemen are making. I met a teacher back in 2002 in South Central Los Angeles, and she had this house a couple blocks from the garden where we were working. And she was a young Iranian woman, and I said, how did you get this house? And she said, oh, I graduated from USC with a teaching degree, and they basically said, if you'll commit 3 years in an underserved school, then you can have a house with no down payment. And so that stuck in my mind, and I was like, yo, why don't we do that for urban farmers and take it to the next step, because we have all these foreclosed homes. So I made the video, I submitted it, it got rejected, no money, and I was sitting with a gentleman named Eric Holt Jimenez of Food First. Anybody know Food First?
Yeah.
That's an organization right out of here. And he was invited to Atlanta a couple months back, and we were sitting at a table, and one of these men who volunteers for Habitat for Humanity was sitting there, Eric was there, I was a guest, and I threw the idea out. When I threw the idea out, people were like, oh, that's a good idea. And because the video has a time and a date stamp on it, and I want to try to own some like, what do they call that, intellectual property, before somebody grabs it and says it's their idea, I put it up on YouTube, right? And the idea is basically what we're talking about. And now we're working with a church, Providence Missionary Baptist Church, that already has a housing ministry in a Southwest Atlanta neighborhood, where they've already purchased properties. And these properties are homes that are foreclosed that are going from $6,000 to $16,000. And they're purchasing these homes. And they're remodeling them, but it was essentially for low-income residents who are members of their church to live in them for like rent that's about $400 or $500. And now we're negotiating with them to say, look, we'll put in a farm for your membership. Our farm will provide food for your membership, and then what's extra we'll sell to the markets if you'll allow us to have 1 or 2 out of these 5 or 8 homes to put in people who are going through our training program to live in. So that, because we're not in a position to pay urban farmers, but we are in a position to negotiate relationships that benefit everybody, especially if we can secure housing. Because a lot of what, like the fight that Nicole is talking about, when these people, if they ever are fortunate enough to come out of these prisons, the best thing for them is to secure them with some housing. And then they can worry about trying to get a job or get education or things like this. And so that is one of the major things on our list that we're actually actively moving forward, is the Farmhouse Project, where we are able to transform foreclosed properties and allow urban growers in training to have some stability in a neighborhood for 1-2 years. And then that means our farm has consistent volunteer help. Does that make sense? Yeah. Those are the projects we're working on.
I don't think that I could speak too much about the actual sanctuary part of it, because that's Heather's deal, and she's the one that's driving that and going to be expanding that when the resources and financially and all that come through. My goal is to start hosting more and more classes at the farm, getting more of these conversations going in different forums and things like that, things that all of us can go and speak at, and just spread the word about it and continue learning. Like I don't have the farming knowledge that these two have, and I'm here learning just as much as everybody else in that regard, and just wanting to just keep planting and ideas. Ideas is like so important.
So I think the next stage for us is that we've gotten kind of good at making videos, and so we're just starting to put up videos. We have one on trellis gardening, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that stuff today. And we've got 5 years of working with a food forest, and you know, all our mistakes and the things that worked. And I want to make some videos and get them out there, because then we can all learn from each other. I really like the video idea. But where you live, grow where you live. Someone said that once. Or twice. We've been working a little with schools, and God knows we're not the only one. All these schools with gardens. And sending the next generation out. I keep thinking that I'm not going to have any children of my own, but I'm going to work with other people's children. So many garden schools out there. I think that that's a really powerful place for all of us to start. And not only are there foreclosed houses, you know there's foreclosed farms out there too.
Okay, we're not going to have time for many more questions. I guess just Michael, I have a question also, and then we're going to try to wrap it up after.
First of all, I want to thank the four of you. I really appreciate you being here and what you're doing and what you said. I mean, it's a lot of new information for me. It's really great. Eugene, I respect what you said about you know, not wanting to be involved in confrontation, and the fact that you know, African Americans are being shot on the street for no reason, just because of systematic racism in this country. So I respect your right to be doing what you're doing, as opposed to being in confrontations. But some of us who are here, you know, we want to end the killing and exploitation of the 60 billion land animals that are killed every year. And yes, there's plenty of food being produced right now, but almost all of it is being produced through using, you know, animal manure, using non-organic methods. So you know, to just to say that there's enough food doesn't sort of deal with the issue of it's not being produced right, it's being produced in the context of this capitalist system that we're in. You know, so I don't expect any of you to have answers to these. These are just things that are of concern. You know, also, many people are not able to grow their own food because of where they live, because of climate conditions, because, I mean, here in California, we have an access to water problem. We're in a drought, and we all have to like minimize how much water we use, which means, you know, if we have enough land to grow food in our backyard or something, we have a real issue around water, and you know, what does someone in Arizona do? You know, what does someone, you know, there's many places, or in New York, how could, you know, the people who all live in New York and Brooklyn, you know, grow their own food? Okay, and then my final comment is, I'm a writer. I don't want to be a farmer. I want to spend all my time, or as much time as I have, as a writer and as an animal rights activist. So I need to depend on food coming from somewhere else, and there's a lot of people in that situation, you know, in this country, around the world. So those are just some of the things I wanted to bring up. I hope we have some comments about them, but I don't, like I said, I don't expect answers.
No, I think those are really good questions, Michael. Nicole, do you want to say anything?
She's having her coffee.
Oh, are you happy? Oh, is the sound isn't?
No, she muted.
She muted.
She muted.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Are you talking to us?
No, she's not.
Oh, okay.
She's muting it now.
Oh, we have tea, and I was very distracted by this tea.
Okay, that's fine. Did you want to say anything to that?
In terms of, yeah, like I agree that not everyone can grow their own food, for sure. You know, like I look after my 94-year-old grandmother, and you know, we have to have models where we're growing food for people that can't, you know, grow it for themselves. And likewise, you know, with capitalism, there's specialist labor and people wanting to do different things and not necessarily farm or grow. Yeah, but I also think that it's really magical, and it is something that we should encourage people to do at any scale they can. I'm sorry, I missed the other half of the conversation because of my tea distraction. So.
I think that the audience here thinks they're getting a nice cultural experience, so it's great. No, but actually what Michael asked is really good because it connects to a couple questions that I wanted to end with, but also with some of the planning that had gone into this this afternoon. We wanted to have not only the workshop with Helen of kind of Veganic Gardening 101, you know, let's get started, let's go get a vacant lot and let's do that. But some people either don't have time, you know, don't live next to the vacant lot, or just really don't feel like it because we're not interested, and that's totally fine. And so the idea was to have also a conversation around, as animal rights activists, how can we promote veganic farming and gardening and food systems in other ways? Unfortunately, it was more of a question of timing that didn't really get put in the schedule, but that was an important thing that I wanted to address, and maybe they can just briefly give us some advice on, you know, what are other ways that we can promote veganic farming. But then, so that's one question that I want to already put out to any of you four who want to answer it. What are other ways to be involved in promoting veganic farming? But then also another question is that here we're not just talking about animal rights or veganic farming, it's really about food sovereignty and having a more just food system, and ultimately, as Nicole is saying, you know, not a capitalist food system. So in that way of thinking, I think there are also other roles that we can play, and not only the role of, you know, let's go occupy the farm and all that. I think there are other things that we can do as well. And so, you know, Nicole, actually, that was maybe a question that I would address to you as someone who's part explicitly of the food sovereignty movement. Are there ways to be involved in that somebody else would want to take on? For example, a writer. And then finally, I have a third question. Sorry, I'm just kind of putting them all out there because we're at the end. But Nicole, you said something that was really great, which was, you know, that vegans do need to be part of the conversations around food sovereignty and do need to be in these spaces, and we do need to get involved, because if not, we're just left with vegan capitalism that's also hellish. So maybe if you could just say a couple more words about that opinion.
You want me to start, or you want other people to answer those questions?
Do you want to? Okay, they're saying for you to start.
Okay. You'll be pleased to know I have my cup of tea, everyone. Yeah, like for me, before I went to prison, like the animal liberation movement was like pretty active, pretty like full on and fairly effective. And when I got out, people were like so frightened to organize because of the state repression, and suddenly just everywhere I looked was like vegan cupcakes. You know, there seemed to be this like revolution when I was inside where people were just completely obsessed with vegan consumerism and shopping, and I just really struggled with it. And I've been, I guess my identity as a vegan has been a bit challenged, because I've been like, do I really want to be part of this movement that is like, you know, yeah, very consumerist often and kind of shallow or single issue or, you know, like super white or privileged. But thankfully, like I've actually taken a lot of inspiration from like people in the US, like the Sister Vegan blog, for example, and like other people that are like looking at veganism in a more radical way, you know, talking about like race and privilege and gender and class, and kind of trying to, yeah, talk about veganism as like being part of like a broader systemic social change, because yeah, I mean you can eat, you know, I did a workshop at an animal rights gathering a year or so ago, and we did a mind map of like a veggie sausage, like a vegan sausage, like a mainstream vegan sausage you'd get in the supermarket, and we like mapped all, and this is people that like don't grow food, don't think about this stuff, they love their chocolate and their sweets and everything else, and they're like imported tea, you know, all this stuff, and we just did a big mind map of like, okay, so you know, we've needed industrial agriculture, and people didn't know what that really meant, so we debunked that and looked at the pesticides and the fertilizers and the transport, and then we looked at, okay, who's growing the soya, and you know, we kind of mapped it all, and suddenly people were like, okay, this sausage isn't like a cruelty-free sausage, you know, this is like a symbol of this like huge, broad food system that's really harmful. So for me, it was about like politicizing people at that gathering to think about food struggles in a much bigger picture, and I think we can all do that if we're involved in the animal liberation movement. Yeah, I think that's important. But in terms of like other people getting active with food sovereignty, like I think just following your passion and using your skills in whatever kind of niche like that makes you happy is really, really important. And I feel like, you know, there's a quite an inspiring food project in the UK called Incredible Edible Todmorden, who use like propaganda gardening. So they know the food in the city isn't really going to feed their people. Well, it's kind of a town in Yorkshire, but they grow food there anyway because they want people to connect to food, and that's led to them starting farms, like peri-urban farms that really are feeding their community. So I think like, but yeah, they have this phrase saying like, if you eat, you're in. So basically, like, if you eat, you are part of this movement in some way, shape or form. Like, you have to be involved in this conversation. So I feel like that's a really nice slogan and a kind of way to just, like, totally open up this whole movement to everyone. Check.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. So who wants the... On either of the first two, or how to promote veganic farming as people who don't want to start growing, for example. Helen, I'd actually asked you once that time. And, yeah, or, you know,
I'm going to pass it on.
I think, like, well, one of the things that I said at the beginning was that some people are going to know different amounts about different things, and your passion is writing. So right?
One of them, yes.
Yeah. So or whatever anybody's passion is. Like when you look at like permaculture projects, like it's spreading in a way where people have expertises in different ways, and they're contributing them in that ways in that way. You know, and that's where their strength is. And maybe along the lines of like knowing your farmer, like we should know our writers and our neighbors and builders and.
Write about veganic gardening and promote that.
No, but seriously, you should, because people aren't writing enough about that. And that would be probably more helpful than, you know, a lot of us can go and plant something because we're learning how to do it now, but we're not here learning how to write, so, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
How many of you have seen the film Cowspiracy? All right, good. So you saw that film, and that's important. One of the things that my position in it is that the resources, the financial resources, are really, really important. And because my understanding of veganism has been around, as Nicole pointed out, a consumer-based culture, right? Which means evidently vegans have expendable income, right? So one of the things that a young woman told me about was a website called Patreon. Have you all heard about Patreon? Anybody know about Patreon? Okay, there's a few people. So Patreon is a website, it's a crowdfunding website where artists predominantly set up whatever it is that they do, and you can become a patron of their work, which means you take $1 or $2 or $10 out of your account every month, and it goes to them. So it's an ongoing support system. And from that, the videos that you're talking about would be something that people would get as a Patreon of your work. So you might want to think about that as for you as well. And so the woman told us to set up a Patreon account. So we set one up. It hasn't been too active. It's only been a couple months. We're still learning it. But I say that the point of it is this. If what you're comfortable with is that exchange, is a currency, pay-to-play consumer exchange, then that's one of the fundamental ways that we're always getting involved, you know? And instead of just deciding to buy organic food or just to buy vegan food, you can be a direct supporter of the growers. So Grow Where You Are has a Patreon page where you could say, hey, I want to put $1 a month out of my account to go to Grow Where You Are. I want to put $10 a month to go to Grow Where You Are. And then if you are a writer or you make videos or you make film, then you can assist people like myself or any of these other groups that might want to start a Patreon page to help make content. And that content becomes what the Patreons get. Because for us, I thought it was a good idea as a platform to have some kind of income coming in, but it also becomes an extra work. Because now I got to film what I'm doing in the garden so that you can see it. And so we're in that kind of entertainment-based culture. We're in a consumer culture. I'm not sure that I would be one to be sitting here saying I want to eradicate capitalism as a farmer. I'm not sure that that's my interest. I do know that capitalism has its foundation and it has a way that it's using, but we're all participating anyway. So there are foundations like that, platforms like that, and then what Joe says, if you have a passion, apply it. And the thing that's probably the last thing that I'm going to say, because I didn't want to speak on it at all, but this is the uncomfortable part, is the presumed or assumed position that I need to depend on somebody else to provide my food. It's got to change. It just has to change. Like she said, if you eat, you're in. And you're not only in the good part of the club, but you're also in the part of the club that is like, hey, I want to do this thing. Every culture was based on agriculture. So the most vibrant cultures in the world, the Aztec, the Mayan, the Kemetic, or the Egyptian, before they had the writers, the astronomers, the healers, the midwives, they situated themselves along a fertile valley and they said, let's grow this food. And then after they grew the food went to the doctors, the priests, the midwives. Do you understand what I mean? So the assumption that we are going to somehow be able to continue what we want to do and have someone else feed us, that's how this whole thing started.
Okay, it made me think of something. Did anybody ever read E.F. Schumacher's book, Good Works? Oh, God, I love that one. Okay. So he went to a factory, and the factory was starting to have less money, and they were going to have to lay people off. But rather than lay people off, they gave people more time. So everybody then was, had more free time. So then they created a garden, because everybody had more time now, so they weren't working as much, so nobody was making as much money, but everybody was making some money rather than laying some people off. So then everybody had more time to work in the garden, they had tools, and everybody used their extra time to grow food, and then they didn't need as much money.
Okay, we need to wrap it up. I really, really, really thank all four of you. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.